We chose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. That was from John F. Kennedy's moon speech at the Rice Stadium on September 12, 1962. The moon landing has been considered one of the most important parts of American history. Why? Because no other country in the world had ever made it that far technologically, and we were in a giant war with the Soviet Union at the time, and garnering our #1 spot was done so by reaching the moon first. Doing so put America on this pedestal of technological importance. However, there is a theory that the moon landing was faked, and this is gained through some circumstantial evidence that kind of would lead someone to believe that some pretty damning evidence parts that prove that we did make it to the moon are all in not that fact true. The moon landing of 1969 was faked through the lead up towards the Apollo 11 mission, the photography logic of the pictures taken, and the Soviet Union's cover-ups of the first man on the moon. Number 1, the space race involving the Soviet Union. So, during this time was the Cold War. It was just after World War II, and in result, both countries, known as the Soviet Union and America, were listed as the #2 countries. They had both a lot of technological advances and war advances to the point where it kind of raised us to a pedestal that we could essentially take out any country that we wanted. However, this was very scary at the time, and one of us clearly wanted to be ahead of the other. In result, there was the space race. Whoever could technologically advance the fastest would be able to garner this #1 position in the world. And in result, multiple things happened. For example, Sputnik, the Russian satellite, was released, and the first man, Yuri Gagarin, was also made it into space. This was kind of scary for America because the Russians had both conquered both of these terms and were kind of advancing a little bit more faster technologically at the time. However, there are these two brothers, Giovanni Cordiglia and his brother. They're both Italian. As soon as Sputnik had been released in the very first part, they had hacked into the comm systems of this satellite and had started listening into the missions going on at the time. And resulted, they recorded some very damning pieces of evidence that have led people to believe that the Russians are covering up who was the very first person in space. These recordings involved some pretty heavy breathing, which after being examined by a doctor had determined that the person on the other side of the recording was most likely dying or going into respiratory failure. Another recording was an argument between a Russian woman and a Russian man. Both were at different points. Some believe that this Russian woman was in space and that this man was down at their headquarters, the cosmonauts' headquarters. And this argument between them resulted in electronic failure. They were arguing over failures in this mission, and this woman asked if she would ever get down from space again, to which she was replied with no. Multiple people died on these missions, and however, they were never released to the public. These are all just recordings and some pieces of evidence that have been found and leaked. No one was ever able to claim the truths of these recording audios or what they actually are. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, we still don't know what these recordings are. However, with the fall of the Soviet Union, there was released the cosmonauts reports, all of them, all their missions, and there are no such recordings of ever missions taking place. The America lead up, #2. So, these are all facts confirmed by NASA, and there is also an article written by Gaia staff about the cover-up of the Apollo 1 mission that I'm going to be about to discuss. Her article is written as "The Apollo 1 Conspiracy Did NASA Cover Up Gus Grissom's Death?" So, there was a lot of pressure to get to the moon. As stated before, Sputnik and the very first man had already been accomplished by the Russians, so America was very keen to get on the first moon track. They wanted to be able to get the very first man on the moon so that they could be 10 times more technologically advanced, because that is a little bit more technologically advanced than just sending someone up into space or a piece of metal up into space. And in result, they started moving fast, spending money, and there was a lot of lack of safety in each and every single one of their missions. In result, there was the Liberty Bell 7 mission, which resulted in which nearly resulted in Gus Grissom's death. On this mission, he had ridden a rocket up into space. However, there was a lot of technological failures. There was wiring failures, and there was a hatch failure to the point where he had submerged into the ocean and had nearly been able to not release himself. It was a lot of problems, and many people claim that Gus did not follow protocol and that he wasn't doing what he's supposed to. However, he has gone down to his grave claiming that it was all electrical wiring failures. And after looking into his rocket and trying to find out exactly what's wrong, it has been proven that it was a malfunctioning failure on NASA's part and not Gus's. In result, after that mission, Grissom had become very critical of the space mission. He had written multiple reports to NASA and the government trying to get NASA to fund it and trying to make sure that the space mission was completely dropped altogether. He knew and claimed that we would never make it to the moon by the end of the decade if we were going at the speed and spending this much money and totally disregarding everyone's safety. He was scared of the outcome and what was to come in this. And he voiced his concerns through a lot of jokes. It resulted in these two pictures, if you want to zoom up on those. There's the lemon picture down below. It's on the very first, on the morning of the Apollo 1 incident. He had brought in a lemon to basically claim, in what was slang at the time, that they were riding a lemon into space. Essentially, he thought the mission was going to fail. And up below is a goof picture of him and his entire team praying over a model of the rocket they were going to be flying up into because they were afraid it was going to fail and that they would die in a fire explosion, which did happen. As Gus Grissom, Edward H. White, and Roger Chaffee all went into space, they noticed two minor concerns at the time that had eventually grown into major concerns, which were that there was a smell leaking from the oxygen tanks that they had brought up, and their comm systems were down, meaning they cannot communicate down with NASA, and that was kind of scary. This escalated to a point where a small fire had outbroke on the rocket, and with the oxygen leaking, there was a huge giant explosion. The entire rocket exploded, and these men died in a fiery, blazing glory, and it was intense and scary, and there was a few things wrong with that. Because one, they had tried to open up their hatches, but their hatches were locked, which they shouldn't have been. They should have been able to access them from the outside, but they weren't able to, and so they were never able to get them out from the outside, meaning someone had tampered with it, or it was a piece of mechanical failure that they forgot to include. On top of it all, their comm systems being failed was a part on NASA and not a part on them. They had checked their wirings and everything was okay. Meaning someone, if you look at it, had done this on purpose. The Apollo 1 incident is what many people believe that NASA was using to cover up any doubt or disbelief that they could make it to the moon. They thought that if they could cover this up, there would be 10 times more belief and there'd be 10 times more positivity of, yes, we can do this, even though this mission was failing terribly. Many people believe that instead of actually going to the moon, it was actually filmed on a Hollywood set using lighting and certain techniques to make it and blurred and black and white photos used to make it seem like they make it to the moon, but in actuality, they never did. Number 3, the pictures involved. So, I got this from this, I got all of these pictures and the points and the facts all from this conspiracy documentary that I watched on Netflix. It's called Faking the Moon Landing. It's actually quite interesting. It includes some very key people in interviews, and it's very interesting. I'd recommend it. But to go into detail, there was multiple pictures taken as soon as the moon landing had taken place. When closer analysis of these pictures, there are some key parts that are wrong with this. For example, if you look on this picture, the American flag is flapping in the wind. There is no air in space, so I don't know how, but this flag is flapping with no air. This would be physically impossible. The flag can't fly without air. And so for this picture to exist, there would have had to have been air or wind or something that would have resulted in that. The second picture we have here, if you zoom up on the black screen top part, which is part of space, as these pictures have depicted, there are no stars at all located in any of these pictures. There's stars in space, so I don't know why they're not in these pictures, but they're not. So, and number 3, there, if you look at these pictures, there's problems with the shadows and how they are placed. This picture, the flag's shadowing is going this way, and this astronaut's shadow is going this way. And in this picture, they're both heading the same direction. And both of these kind of just don't make sense. There's a lot of different light sources when there is only one light source, the sun, especially on space. There's no ring lights or anything that would help someone get a different view or anything. So these shadows are claimed to be Hollywood lighting. And number 3, if you zoom up on this astronaut's helmet, there is no evidence of a camera being shown in the reflection of his helmet at all. How'd this picture get taken? It shouldn't exist, technically. People believe that it was done by a Hollywood camera and they were able to Photoshop it out or something of the sort. Or that it was taken from an angle that only Hollywood know, to make sure that the camera wasn't in the picture. So, do I believe that the moon landing was faked based on these pieces of evidence? No, not at all. Moon landing was definitely not faked. It definitely happened, and here is why. The Soviet Union cover-up. Like I said before, when the Soviet Union fell, the Russians had released all the records that had resulted in the cosmonaut experiments, missions, and everything resulting, and there is no evidence that there was failed missions or attempts before. Without these evidence, you can't really claim something happened. We only have the audio recordings, and those could have been, and those are very ambiguous when you actually listen to them. Number 2, Gus Grissom is reported saying that if we die, we want people to accept it. We're in a risky business, and we hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life. Gus Grissom was a cynic and very much a realist in his program. He thought they were going to fail because he looked at all these facts that they had never actually made it to space, that Sputnik had been released, the Russians were advancing more farther than them, and each of their missions had kind of failed in a fiery blaze. And he was scared we weren't going to make it based on those, because anyone would be scared. Everything was failing at the time. And so he was being very real. Each of his reports actually advocated for more funding towards NASA in some of the wording, and had necessarily was in support of the space program rather than just completely abdicating it, but was focused on more safety or getting rid of the program altogether. All right, and the pictures. Number 1, the very first one, the one with the flag. So if you move something in space, there's no air or a lot of frequency that would slow it down. So if you're going to move something and you're going to make something fly, it's going to keep moving like that for a very long time, because there's nothing that's going to be up there that's going to stop it. So these vibrations are actually from the astronauts making it big and wide so that you can see the American flag instead of just having it dangle or in a weird formation. So yes, the flag is actually supposed to look like that. Number 2, the stars. When you take a picture with the flash on, other lighting in the picture is not going to be taken up very well. So meaning these pictures are overexposed. The stars are not going to be recorded. Have you ever gone out into the night sky and taken a picture of the sky? You're not going to see the moon very clearly. You're not going to see the stars, and that's because there's overexposure from other lighting sources that cause the moon and the stars to be covered up a bit. And that is what's happening in these pictures. Number 3, the shadows in the pictures. So light gets reflected on the moon very easily. It's a very bright planet and very white. There was also a lot of machinery on there, like their rockets, that was all made of metal. And in result, the light from the sun and from other sources, such as like their rocket or anything else, can be reflected very easily and very subtly. So there should be problems, so many problems with the shadows in these pictures that would lead anyone to believe that there's multiple lighting sources when in fact there's just one being reflected. And pictures, they had actually, if you look even here, you can see it. They had cameras put on the chests of their astronaut suits, and if you zoom in really far, you can see there's this astronaut that is being reflected in his helmet, and that's who is taking the picture. Meaning, there is a camera. It's not Hollywood magic or anything of the fact like that. So why am I going over something that I don't even believe Number 1, skepticism. As John F. Kennedy had quoted, and as I quoted at the very beginning, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. It is important to note that as people, we should never ever take anything point blindly. We should focus on the evidence that leads up to our proof and what we believe and know is true. And we should always base everything that we know on this. We should never trust anyone completely blindly, and always make sure that we know where we are coming from and that we can base everything we say on truth and evidence. It is always important to be a skeptic. You should always look at everything that is considered to be 100% true and challenge it. See if there's anything that's different about it. See if there's something that we can disprove about this. So, thank you.